organization that promotes ecological design across Scotland. And SEDA Solar is an arm under SEDA. We promote solar energy. And we have a few activities lined up for this year. How do I move my screen? Sorry, I'm having problem moving my screen. Can you see my screen? Okay, this is one award that we would like to invite for participation, Kerr McGregor Award for Solar Innovation. We are now open for abstract submission. The submission deadline is 10 December. So please visit our website for more information. And we have a series of seminars in pipeline. For this year, we have already organized 3. This is the second. And next month, we have another one. And for next year, we have at least 6 that we are planning, and maybe more. So if you have any ideas or input, or if you would like to become a speaker, please contact us. And you may like to join SEDA to become a member, so you get a member price for for the tickets. And with this, we would like to start our seminar today. Solar PV has been getting a lot of attention lately, and it's crowned the new king of electricity last month. And with our current installation capacity of about 14 gigawatt, we need to at least triple our installation to meet the net zero target. So with this as a backdrop, today we are pleased to have a few experts to listen from the horse's mouth about the latest development of solar PV in UK. And I would like to let you know that we will be recording as the speakers start speaking, and we only record during the lecture. So please turn off your video if you would not like to be recorded. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Grant Vesey. Grant is a senior design engineer in AES Solar. AES Solar is one of the oldest solar companies in Scotland and the longest existing solar thermal manufacturer in Western Europe, based in Forres. Grant is a chartered engineer with expertise both in solar thermal and solar PV. He has been involved in the development of AES solar thermal heat, a flat plate collector. He has also deployed over 100 of PV systems from large and small scales, from initial concept through final sign-off. Grant is a member of several industrial working groups, including Solar Trade Association, Solar Heat Working Group, MCS Solar Thermal Working Group, MCS Rooftop Solar PV Working Group. He also leads AES contribution in the International Energy Agency Solar Heating and Cooling Research and Dissemination Task. Grant also leads innovation activities such as AES participation in the Horizon 2020 projects involving such as solar cooling using adsorption heat pumps and optimization of solar PV powered heat pumps coupled with latent heat storage. Grant, the floor is yours now.
Excellent, thank you very much. Hello everyone, and thank you for your time and coming to listen to us. I've been asked to give a brief overview of the place for photoelectric or solar PV, if you prefer, in at domestic and commercial scale in Scotland. So it's quite a broad brief, quite a brief time. So I'll move forward and hopefully have something interesting for all of you. So hopefully you can see my slides now, is that correct?
Not in the presentation mode.
Oh, okay.
I can see it okay.
Okay. Thanks. Now I'll just put it back again just to make sure. Sorry, it's the usual, work perfectly in practice, but it's sorry, how's that, Neil? Is that looking okay?
It's not in the full presentation mode.
Okay, according to mine, it should be sharing.
We're seeing your presenter mode, so we see the next slide as well.
I see. Okay. I'll try something different then. Let me try this. All right, sorry, is that better?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, right, sorry about that. Okay, so so an overview of the solar PV market. Currently, the sectors that we cover that, as we identify them, the domestic, which I would class generally as a sub 10 kilowatt, around 4 or 5 kilowatts is common, a common size, as for various reasons that I'll explain. And commercial, which I would class as up to around 250 kilowatt, which can be in the range of a few hundred panels, which is where you might see large farm buildings or factories covered. And within those segments, generally we would split the categories between the new build segment and the retrofit existing buildings. That retrofit there is particularly interesting. It's at Lindisfarne Castle off the coast near Berwick, where we were involved, which is a 16th century castle. So even older, extremely old buildings can be candidates for this kind of thing. So within the retrofit, the existing building category, we have domestic and commercial category. Domestic tends to be owner-occupier or social housing operators. Commercial, usually you're dealing with the building owner. For new build, you were split either with domestic self-build, where people are invested in their own property, housing developers, where they build 50 to 100 houses at a time, or main contractors building large commercial buildings, factories, offices. As a general, very, very general overview, and there were opportunities for questions and to ask me after the presentation, after tonight, if you want deeper figures. But as a general rule, over the last few years, the PV story in Scotland and the UK has very much been a shift from predominantly retrofit existing buildings, where which was driven by feed-in tariffs and incentives. I would say we were doing something like 95% of our PV work at that time, solar photoelectric work at that time, was existing buildings, and that shifted very much towards predominantly new builds, particularly within Scotland. I'd say 80 to 90% of the installations that we carry out are new build properties, I would say. The costs of systems as a whole, so this is the full turnkey installation for buildings, has dropped considerably, of a factor of 4, even 5 times those figures in the slide refer to smaller domestic houses. So for say 7-8 years ago, you would have been around £15,000, even £20,000 would have been a ballpark figure for a domestic house for a solar PV system. We're now looking at around 4,000 to 5,000, maybe 7,000 at the top end for the top specification components for a domestic property. So considerable price drops, and that's driven primarily by the cost of panels, which predominantly come from Asia, some other parts of the world. You can see the price drop from a few years ago from £1 a watt was common. There's a big range now, but you're looking at something like 20% of the cost. Way down at the bottom end, 20 pence per watt is a common cost for the mass-produced budget end. It can be considerably more expensive if you pay for panels with higher performance warranties, more longevity, or features such as solar glazing or solar tiles, or more sophisticated products. And the panel efficiency has increased somewhat. The sizes have stayed fairly typical because the construction industry doesn't like rapid change in a lot of ways, and the common size of panels, the standard panels you see on roofs are actually quite practical. But what has changed now is the output of modules. So that efficiency, I always say, the efficiency isn't overly critical. You just need more panels to achieve the same output. But when you are looking at bigger systems, which are becoming more practical nowadays with more and more heat pumps, electric vehicles out there, more electricity use in general, it can be useful to fit as much solar on the roof as possible. So that's where that efficiency and the higher cost, high efficiency panels can be useful. The industry was stuck in a trend of 250 watts per panel for a long time, partly because it's a nice number and partly because that's where the efficiency we're at. But we have moved on now to around about 300, 320 watts for a typical size panel at that lower cost end, up to around 400 watts for that standard size module for the higher end panels. So that's where the standard modules have moved on to. The forces that have driven these trends are largely change in the regulation scenarios. Up until maybe 2 years ago, it was largely driven by the feed-in tariff, which was really a case of people being driven by the financial returns, what they would get paid by the government. So that time you would get paid for everything you generate, you would get paid an amount by the government for everything that you would export. That's finished a couple of years ago. And thankfully, with the price drops that are in place, which is driven by global price reductions of components, as well as a growth in the installation industry in the UK and within Scotland, but mostly panel price drops that I showed previously there. The solar is viable in most cases without any kind of government incentive. So now most installations now have a very reasonable payback in the order of 8 to 12 years, depending on the quality of kit used, based purely on the energy cost savings and an export tariff, which can usually be accessed through a smart export guarantee, whereby especially the large electricity companies are obliged to offer some kind of export tariff, provided you have a smart meter. The other thing that's affected these trends is the building regulations particularly within Scotland, though I think the rest of the UK will catch up sooner rather than later. It's very difficult to construct a new building, get permission without some kind of bolt on renewables to meet your energy requirements, your energy calculations. Self-builders are very keen to get really involved and generally go for higher spec, more sophisticated things, but even house builders now are finding that they've gone through initially having to put 1 or 2 panels per house to meet their energy calculations. Now we're seeing them having to put 3 kilowatts, 4 kilowatts per house to meet these minimum requirements. And house buyers are starting to put more pressure on as I think generally use the term social conscience. People are seeking energy efficient houses to safeguard against running costs, but also because it's a wide societal issue. People like to feel like they're living responsibly, I guess. So that is also a driver. So this switch from incentive-driven existing building owners trying to do something cost efficient, moving to people wanting to do it for the right reasons, and also because of more sophisticated, intelligent building regulations, we've seen this shift towards new build, and hopefully that will continue. Retrofit's important, and that's still where most of the work has to be done, but new build sector in Scotland just now is extremely busy. There's a lot of houses and properties being built, and thankfully the regulations are encouraging people to design them in the right way, which includes solar PV. So in terms of technological trends, the modules themselves, we've very much moved away from this in the top left. You can see the sort of, I would say, an older image of the blue fronted panels with the silver frames, which a lot of people didn't like. That's very rare to see now. It used to be you'd have to pay a premium to have a black frame, something more discreet. Whereas nowadays, the photo to the top right is the more typical, even lower cost end with black frames, a bit more discreet, a bit more attractive from the roadside. And the lower picture there is of a more common new build now. Vast majority of new build tile and slate roofs are what we'd call roof integrated or in roof. So they're flashed in, they replace the tile or slate, so you've got cost savings to do with materials there. Also looks a lot sleeker. It's a smart way to do it, and it has become the default way to do silent slate roofs, and you don't really need to pay a premium for that. There are other options aside from the standard modules. We've installed products such as the one at the top left, which is referred to as a solar slate or solar tile product, where you have smaller modules that are designed to mimic slates or tiles. Generally can be a 40 to 50% premium on those, so we don't do a lot of them. A lot of people like the idea, but the cost quite often can be a deal breaker when people are trying to decide where to spend their money. Companies like Tesla are bringing out soon things like more sophisticated solar tiles, so there's constant development in what's available there. Again, likely to be a premium product, but you do get the cost savings of not having to have tiles underneath the panels, and the looks, the aesthetics are getting better as people demand that. They've also included the polysolar product that we'll hear about later, which is an example of, again, more sophisticated options which replace some of the fabric cost that would exist anyway, and allows you to utilise some of the building envelope in a discreet way to generate some of your energy needs. The solar inverter is another key part of the solar PV system. To not get too technical, but the general difference, you have what's called string inverters that optimize sections of the array. And if you have each section of the solar system is limited to the performance of the purest panel in that section. More sophisticated systems, which add a little bit of cost, typically 10 to 20% of the system cost, allow each panel to be optimized individually. These can be in the form of optimizer systems like Solar Edge or microinverter systems. They also allow more sophisticated diagnostic and monitoring. So instead of having someone come out if you suspect a fault to physically get on the roof and measure things, you can see on your phone or your tablet what's going on, where any issues might be. Also comes more sophisticated monitoring. So instead of just knowing what the panels are generating, you can see what's being used, what's being exported. There's also sophisticated monitoring, which show the next slide, which ties in with other devices. As houses get smarter in general, people are getting more aware, they want to see what's going on. So the inverters still do the basic job, they convert the DC from the panels to AC to go to the grid, but they're just doing this in a more intelligent way. They're allowing people to interact with their systems and for the systems in the house to interact with each other in a way that consumers can understand. So the other products that go alongside solar PV, there's a growing trend for people not just to want to generate their own energy, but to have more and more of these devices that allow them to use it smartly and to be self-sufficient. And you get two types of customers. You get customers who want it to be sustainable and cost effective. You also get customers who see energy products now as a section of gadgets. So people would look at spending money on televisions or nice furniture or cars. Now they're looking at things like home batteries, where they can see how much energy they're using themselves. They can use that power in a power cut. You can divert energy to your hot water tanks to maximize how much energy you use on site. Electric vehicles are becoming more common, and also things like smart hot water tanks. A company called Mixergy that have a nice product that can tie into smart sort of grid trading that could benefit from smart tariffs, where you can automatically use energy in the tank. You can import during low tariff times, and systems can manage all this automatically. So that's some of the things that you could talk for hours, but that's some of the things that are around just now. The graphic on the right of this slide shows a nice project for a company called My Energy, where previously a lot of these products, they would have very simple visibility and monitoring, and they would all be very separate. And one thing that's becoming more common, which is nice about this My Energy product, is that you can see everything on one platform, one app, which makes it easy to understand. So you can visualize what the energy the house is using, how much your solar might be generating, how much you're taking or giving to the grid, how much is in your home battery, how much your EV charger is using. You can even use the EV charger as a mobile battery. You could charge somewhere else for free or low cost. You could come back and put that in your house. So this is a direction on the software side and the monitoring side where things are getting more sophisticated and more user-friendly. You don't need to be a sort of a computer expert or an IT expert to use these things. Viability was something that I wanted to talk about. So I've included a couple of simple examples for the current state of returns. This is an example of a domestic system, around about 5 kilowatts, which would be around 16, 18 panels nowadays. Just slightly on the bigger side for domestic house, but if you've got heat pumps and electric vehicles, you can certainly use most of that. And this shows for a system costing around about £5,000 or £6,000 up front. You're certainly in single figures in terms of how long that would pay back, based on a typical energy cost of around 16 pence per unit and an export tariff of 5 pence a unit. And this is based on the MCS payback calculation method, which is the one most commonly used for domestic properties in the standards, and it's one that every MCS certified contractor should be using when they're proposing systems, which I think shows, and this is without a feed-in tariff, without incentives, which I think shows quite a viable return. This example is for a commercial system, so this is for a 50 kilowatt system, so 10 times the size. The cost per kilowatt is coming down because the cost of economy of scale, more efficiency for the installation, and this is showing an even shorter payback time. And again, this is based on using approximately half the energy on site, which can be improved with proactive monitoring, like I showed before, and learning when to use the electricity. And it's based on no incentives, no feed-in tariff. It's purely a small export tariff and just using energy you generate yourself on site as much as you can at the right times. Battery storage is becoming much more common, and I would say particularly this year, I would say we've moved from battery storage being very much a niche or a niche product for people looking to spend a bit more on things for the technology value. It's becoming far more common. I would say between a third and a half of domestic systems now, I think, have been installed with battery storage for us now. And we've got a lot of people who've installed PV for in the past coming back looking for it. And the main reason is without battery storage, you can use something like a third to a half of your own energy in a house, purely because you're not necessarily generating it when you want to use it. The battery storage smooths that out, so you can increase your self-usage from something like 30 to 50% up to easily over 90% in a domestic property. So you get the benefit of that extra energy that you're not having to buy from the grid. You're just parking it in your own battery, you're using it yourself. I haven't included a payback just because it varies so much depending on when you use energy, how much you use, the occupancy of the house, but there is very good guidance and standards now. For example, the MCS self-consumption guidance, which will give you a very accurate self-consumption estimate based on house occupancy, house usage, where you are in the country, your size of PV system, your size of battery, again, which any installer should be in a position to give you. But typically, battery storage is coming down very slowly, but it would increase at the moment. It would increase or have the overall payback very similar at the moment, but that picture will change as compared to just having PV on its own. There are intelligent tariffs coming into place. So typically, you'll have a standing charge or an import tariff. For example, Tesla recently have introduced a a low import, high export, and a zero standing charge option for Tesla battery owners, which have included a comparison there, and that can considerably reduce your costs, because with standing charge can be around £100 a year, even if you don't use any energy. So this allows you, if you can use all your energy and cover your needs yourself, the cost could potentially be zero. Just moving quickly to the last couple of sections, the potential in Scotland, which has been modelled by figures from the Solar Trade Association and the Committee on Climate Change that advise the government. These are the kind of figures that they're looking at up to 2030 for the potential for the different sectors in Scotland. The two sections I've talked about today, domestic and commercial building scale, 11 gigawatt peak capacity of potential. So a huge potential there if we can have the right environment. And I think with the regulations and the costs, the viability at the moment, certainly I think we're only increasing in the amount of installations we're doing. So there's huge potential there. Grid capacity quickly. I'm conscious of time, but if you're anything below that 4 kilowatt for a house or 11 kilowatt for a domestic property, there's no issue, you can install for free. Above that, it varies greatly. If you're just above those figures, often the cost can be zero, but it can quickly go to thousands in certain areas, particularly Aberdeenshire and areas of the Central Belt just now we're finding. There are solutions to that. Export limitation, if you're going to have storage and use most of your energy yourself anyway, you can limit the exports so that you're not, you then don't have to have an increased connection to the grid. Off-grid's a solution for some self-builds. If your connection costs for your new electricity connection is as little as £20,000, it can be viable to have an entirely off-grid system instead, with a generator and batteries and a large-scale solar with high self-coverage that can give you equal or better reliability compared to the grids, and at much reduced running costs, because most of the energy is going to be coming from the solar. So with EVs and heat pumps as well, the grid is constrained, but there are a lot of works going on all over the country in Scotland to improve things. Systems, processes for applying for permission is improving, so the whole thing is getting much more efficient. So hopefully I've given you enough to think about there, but I'll leave it there. And I'll be around for questions at the end. So I'll hand back. So thank you very much. So I think, Pua, you're muted, so we can't hear you.
Thank you very much. If you have any question, please feel free to type it into our chat box. Now I would like to introduce our second speaker, Mr. Hamish Watson. Mr. Hamish is a founder and CEO of Polysolar, an award-winning PV company based in Cambridge. Polysolar is a producer of innovative transparent solar PV glazing using next-generation organic polymer printed onto glass. The company works across the entire supply chain, from fabricating structures, manufacturing glass, integrating electronics, up to designing and contracting projects. Hamish sits on government and advisory bodies on solar and renewable energy, and he is also involved with the MCS working group on solar. Hamish has extensive expertise in international entrepreneurship and technology commercialization. He has set up companies in a diverse field, including mobile communication, cancer diagnostics, and solar renewable energy. Mr. Hamish, please take it away.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. And Grant, thank you for the brief introduction to myself as well. So I'll be talking a little bit about what we do as a company, but also the technology behind it. So I'll try and share my screen, and hopefully I can not have the same problems that Grant had, but now. Okay, we still got the same problem. I just done. Sorry, it's got the same problem you had, Grant. Sorry, Grant, how did you manage to overcome? Hopefully you can see mainly my screen, and you might see a bit down the side, but is that right?
There is a slideshow on the sort of top of your screen.
Yeah.
About 6 along or something. Might help.
I think I'm back on. You're still seeing the next slide there, are you?
Mm.
I think you either have to unshare your screen and then share it again with the option of showing just the actual presentation, or you can do a full screen mode so that your entire screen yourself is taken up by the presentation.
Okay, so let me just unshare it. Am I sharing my screen currently?
No.
Okay, fine. Any suggestions?
Mhm.
So can you see the screen anyway? I'm just going to have to fire away, I'm afraid. Okay, so I'll talk a bit about. Sorry, I just get this bit out of the way. So I'll talk a bit about what the developments are in the world of transparent photovoltaics, and also some of the new technologies that are occurring. And I'll try and go through it as quickly as possible on the basis that we've lost a bit of time. Hopefully this will play. No, it won't. That's just it was going to get the BBC to introduce our activities. We had a garden at Chelsea Flower Show last year, where we had a pagoda with our glass in that. It was a sponsored stand by LG. If you get the chance to go online and have a look. So Polysolar specializes in transparent photovoltaics. A lot of people aren't aware that transparent photovoltaics exist. We produce in a variety of different technologies, but generally speaking, it's the active materials are thin film photovoltaic materials, where we put in transparent conductive oxides to act as a cathode and an anode on either side. And then the active material can either be transparent or patterned in order to let the light through. The category that we operate in as a company is known as building integrated photovoltaics. It's a very small niche relative to the overall solar market. But really what it is that the material, the photovoltaic material is first and foremost a building material, and secondly, a power generator. And therefore, while you're not getting the same efficiencies and amount of power generated from as you would from a conventional solar panel, it is being used as a building material, and it's a substitution building material, and therefore it's a marginal additional cost in the construction process. You've already costed your glass. All you're getting from that glass is a slightly more expensive glass, which is able to produce power. Historically, BIPV, as it's known, or building integrated photovoltaics, has been seen as very much a sort of niche image thing, which really didn't produce any power and really was pretty useless in most situations. The largest BIPV installation actually was in Manchester, now near over a decade ago now, I think, and produced very little power, but it just sort of goes to show how slow the progress has been within building integrated photovoltaics. Having said that, if you used our glass, for example, on the shard would be an energy positive building. In most cases, that's not the case. Commercial office space tends not to have very much area relative to the amount of power it uses. But on the vertical, there is a lot of area of the envelope of the building that is usable and very little roof space to put conventional solar on. What's interestingly in terms of the evolution of building integrated photovoltaics, similar to overall domestic and commercial solar, sort of started out life with a very niche area of people who were sort of committed to carbon reduction, and that was sort of driven forward by feed-in tariff subsidies, and so it became very much a revenue or sort of financial driven sector of the market. More recently, with the loss of both the feed-in tariffs, but also just general development within the electric economy, it's been driven by sort of planning and building controls, carbon taxes, and those sorts of things. And more recently, it's moved into the area of what I would describe as sort of localized energy generation. So where people are looking to make their own carbon savings, make their own energy, and make their own contribution. That's both at a business level as well as a domestic level. And that's been enhanced by a lot of developments in things like smart grids, in things like electric vehicle charging, vehicle to grid charging, and the storage areas that Grant has spoken about. Photovoltaic glazing is more than just a piece of glass, and it's more than a solar panel. It actually performs multiple functions and should be sort of used as a multifunctional glazing material. So it's basically a high-end glazing, where it not only has the ability to produce power, but it also can reduce thermal losses, also can be used as an architectural feature. However, everything always comes down to price and return on investment. So this is true within building integrated photovoltaics as it is in conventional photovoltaics. This is a sort of an example as a sort of guidance. It certainly doesn't address any particular figures here. But if you're looking at a replacement for a curtain walling system in a office building, the construction costs with BIPV are the same. Your curtain walling framework, which is the aluminium mounting frame for glazing, is basically the same. That we make small adaptations to existing systems, and we have our own as well. And then you've got the glass cost. Now, the glass cost here is the glass for the outer glass, which is the photovoltaic glass, vis-a-vis a conventional piece of glass. But when it's built into a double glazed unit, its proportionate cost becomes fairly small as an additional cost for that sort of PV element. And then you've got on top of that, I mean, broadly speaking, to give you a rough idea, a PV glass vis-a-vis a conventional glass is probably about twice as much for the actual glass, but once it's into a high-end unit, it becomes actually quite a small proportion. On top of that, you've got the electrical element, that's the wiring and the inverters and those sorts of things. They, as a proportion, are relatively small in BIPV, and their costs have dropped quite dramatically as well, alongside the cost of PV itself. In addition, you may do away with things like shading systems, brise-soleils, and those sorts of things on the outside of the building, i.e. mechanical constructions. And therefore the cost may be offset there. In return, you're obviously getting the energy yield, but equally you're also getting energy savings. So I'll come on to it a bit, but one of the key benefits of solar glass is actually reduced thermal gain in a building, and also reduced thermal losses. And given that architecture is all about trying to put as much glass on an office building as possible, in order to allow it to be a deeper building and let light to the center of the building. The disadvantage of putting glass in a building is your heat losses or heat gains are significant, and therefore all those benefits are being lost in the energy that you've had to use. So there's always that trade-off in construction. So just to give you a rough idea in terms of the technologies here. So one of the advantages of thin film and the transparent glass that we use is it works at it works at high temperatures, less reduction in efficiency at high temperatures. Its efficiency is also consistent across the light spectrum, the light intensity, and so you don't get that drop off with low light levels. equally, it's less sensitive to shading, and we tend to link in parallel. So you're doing away with the need for microinverters and the like on a system. As I said, the other side of it is the thermal performance side of it. So you're getting G values, and G value is primarily the heat gain into a building. And that is basically about half what you get out of high-end glazing currently using photovoltaic glazing. The U value is the insulation value, and that in most cases is about the equivalent of a triple glazed unit vis-a-vis a double glazed unit. So those thermal values can actually produce much more of a benefit or a return to the customer than actually the power that they're generating in the first place. But it's an interesting factor. The reason behind that is threefold. One is that the glass, the actual cells of the glass are made up of the same materials that you use to reflect heat anyway in conventional glass, but that actually makes the cell of the glass. In addition to that, you've got the shading effect of the photovoltaic, and in addition to that, you've also got some of that infrared light being transferred into electricity rather than into heat. In terms of the environmental credentials for thin film materials, and we produce in the amorphous silicon and the cadmium telluride sector, which is ASI on there and CDTTE on there. As you can see, there's significantly less embedded carbon in their production return than there is in conventional PV. Equally, if you look at the other side of the scale there, which is the red ones for gas and coal, they have a completely different scale because their carbon emission is so much higher than the renewables. So it's an interesting one. This is recent research from Swansea University. In terms of what we produce as a company, we started out life with amorphous silicon. We made that transparent primarily just by putting a transparent conductive layer on the other side of the glass. And it's a technology which was developed originally by BP about 20 odd years ago. Low efficiency relative to today's technology, and has largely dropped out of the market as being an element there. Was much more important a decade ago when when crystalline silicon was very expensive. We more recently we developed products in the cadmium telluride sector. And this is a slightly different technology in the sense that the active material we put on and then we take off with a laser in order to pattern it to let light through, and therefore we can vary that transparency depending on what you want. Again, the efficiency is about twice what it is for amorphous silicon, but still it's about half of what it is for crystalline silicon still, where we also produce crystalline silicon semi-transparent cells where you've got crystalline cells embedded in glass and the light is allowed through around that, but it isn't actually a see-through system. Our next generation of technologies and where we are one of the world leaders is in organic photovoltaics, which is man-made materials performing the same function, but the great advantage from a transparency point of view is that we can make them naturally transparent, and we can also save a lot of money in terms of how it's produced and much more effective for the solar or the glazing industry rather than just the solar industry. The efficiency levels are rising all the time in terms of the technology. So just to give you a little bit of background into what we do here, it's still not a production product from our point of view. It is, however, not that far away. So people are starting to put this on buildings today, not our stuff. We put it on direct onto glass currently, so we deposit direct onto glass rather than onto a flexible substrate. But we are also putting onto flexible substrate or planning to do so. In terms of efficiency now, we're getting up to near the levels of crystalline silicon, certainly at a lab-based level. Going forward, the theoretical limit to what the conversion factor can be for organics is actually significantly higher than what it is for crystalline silicon. So going forward, there's the possibility of it getting much more efficient than current solar panels are today. In terms of just let you know a bit about other technologies, you've probably all heard about perovskites. Oxford PV is one of the pioneers in that field. That's a technology which has been very successful in terms of its efficiency improvements, had a lot of global interest in terms of research and development. Has a few problems with it still in terms of both its lifetime expectancy side of things, but also the fact that it has a lot of lead in its manufacture. And so has sort of still constraining factors within there. More recently, Oxford PV started putting their perovskites on the top of crystalline silicon to increase the overall efficiency of conventional solar panels. In addition to that, there's some other technologies, and I won't go into all of them, but there's concentrators, there's sort of luminescent films, there's diverting the light to concentrated PV cells on the side of windows to make them transparent, and a number of sort of areas around that, none of which we directly operate in, but you should be aware of them. In terms of the manufacturing side, the great advantage of organics is that it's a liquid print process. So we can print the active materials directly onto the glass, and we can do that with spray coaters and actually just spray those materials on in order to build up your cell. That has advantages from the glazing point of view, because it means we can make modules of different sizes, shapes, really anything that you can do with glass today, we can do with PV glass. Equally, the cost is relatively low, the material cost is low, and the production cost is relatively low. And also it is environmentally more friendly than the existing processes for the manufacture of crystalline silicon modules. Other areas that we're involved in is also in terms of developments as well, is in prefabrication and other alternative coatings to make them more aesthetically pleasing. So today you can buy coatings for PV cells which are white. So you can have white solar panels. Yes, they're not quite as efficient as the original solar panel, but the fact that they work at all with a white coating in itself is quite clever. Equally, one of the constraints of building with photovoltaic glazing has been the need for different trades, need for different skills within the construction sector that haven't really existed. And therefore, we're trying to move as far as possible into a prefabricated modularized type system where we can put in all the wiring is already in place and you're just putting the sections of those buildings together. I should also talk a bit about building applied PV. Now we classify building BIPV as being part of the core envelope of a building. BAPV rather, or building applied photovoltaics, is when you're attaching the photovoltaic material to another existing. So there's particularly the flexible PV area, you're sticking it onto roofs, and increasingly with OPV and some of our competitors are putting their plastic films onto other structures. So I'll, given the time, I don't know how we're doing, but I'll try and sort of quickly run through some of it, just so you've got sort of certain examples of some of our installations and projects, and hence where the applications for BIPV are. This is a project for Gloucester County Council. This was a 1960s their office buildings, quite a substantial array of office buildings, where we stripped down the original cladding and replaced it with photovoltaics. So these are the sort of brownie colored panels on here, as well as some of the window glazing panels. And they're put in as double glazed units, and we've also got conventional PV on the roof on this particular project. Again, rain screen cladding. So rain screen cladding is really a bit rather than framing it, you just bond it to a framework behind it. This is actually the largest building in Gibraltar, and this is cladding over a concrete car park element of the building, to be honest. Skylights, this is a project in Donington, but the advantage is you're letting natural light through into the space below while still producing power and still having an attractive roofing system. Canopies, one of our sort of largest area of activities. We've done a number of petrol stations for Sainsbury's, whereby rather than having your conventional dual layer of 2 sheets of metal, you do away with that. The actual structure therefore becomes cheaper than the conventional structure. In Sainsbury's case, the glass is naturally orange, so it suits their branding, but it also produces a reasonable amount of power to help power their pumps and kiosks and everything else. Shelters, sort of street furniture type of structures, whereby you're making a feature out of existing structures that you want anyway, and therefore you're getting a double advantage. Bus shelters, this one's at Canary Wharf, just outside HSBC's headquarters in Canary Wharf in London. This powers the lighting, the advertising boarding and the like, but also then is fed, any excess is fed into the shopping centre below here. The inverters are hidden within the framework of the structure, and this is doing the role of a bus shelter. Another important area for us is heritage projects, and Grant mentioned the castle. So one of the problems with heritage buildings is that they're all keen to be as low carbon as possible, but very difficult to put any conventional solar panels on a building of historic importance. But with glazing, they can do that without any real major impact. This is an outdoor swimming pool in the Peak District, supposedly the world's prettiest Lido, but whether that's true or not is debatable. But this was a project where in the Victorian times it had a glass roof, was then replaced with a corrugated iron roof, and now as a glass roof again.
Sorry, Hamish, can we wrap up?
Yeah, sorry. Infrastructure projects, electric vehicle charging points, increasingly important from our point of view, and there's a lot of energy going into the electric vehicle charging area, as well as sort of smart homes where you're improving the general ability to sell a property as much as you are actually generating power. So it looks as though my computer's given up on me anyway. So a good place to start. Okay. We put our glass in greenhouses. We actually get improvements in growth of plants. We can double the protein content of plants, and strange sort of elements like that. So one last one. Automotive glazing. We've got the world's first. Well, we believe it's the first integrated transparent PV sunroof. We're working on that area as well. So thank you very much for your time, and sorry for the slight technical problems at the beginning.
Thank you very much, Hamish. So now I would like to introduce our third speaker, Professor Neil Robertson. Professor Neil is the chair of Molecular Materials, School of Chemistry, Dean, International Partnership College of Science and Engineering, both in University of Edinburgh. Professor Neil leads research on new molecular and nanomaterials for solar PV, photocatalysis, electrical energy storage material and devices. He is the Fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry, Fellow of the Higher Education Academy, Energy Technology Partnership, Theme Leader on Solar Energy, Associate Editor of Royal Society of Chemistry, Journal of Materials Chemistry. Professor Neil has led the project development of the first solar vision for Scotland in 2014. He was a member of the Solar Commission team reporting on solar innovation in UK, published last year. He is also the co-editor of ETP Review of Innovation in the Scottish Solar Energy Sector, due to be published soon. Professor Neil, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. So thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to you all this evening. I promise not to take too long. I know it's getting late. I'm going to talk particularly about perovskite solar cells and dye-sensitized solar cells as potential disruptive technologies. So really following on from some of the things that Hamish was saying towards the end of his talk when he was introducing some other emerging solar technologies. Before that though, I'll just expand upon part of the introduction there, which was to mention the Energy Technology Partnership Review of Innovation and Opportunity in the Scottish Solar Energy Sector, which was released just last week. So this had a wide input from the industry and academic representatives, and really covers quite a range of different opportunities in a way that's intended to attract the attention of government or other potential supporters of the solar sector. So this can be downloaded from the Energy Technology Partnership webpage. So if you Google the Energy Technology Partnership Scotland and go to the News and Events button, then you can download a copy of the report, and feel free to use any facts and figures you find in there to support your ideas when advocating for solar. So I'm going to talk about some emerging technologies, and I first of all wanted to start off with this well-known chart, which I'm sure many of you have seen before, from the National Renewable Energy Lab in the US, which is updated every year, goes back to the mid-70s and plots cell efficiencies against time for a number of different technologies. And if you're unfamiliar with this chart, then probably the first thing that strikes you is just how many technologies there are. We're all very familiar with a handful of key players: crystalline silicon, amorphous silicon, cadmium telluride, CIGS, for example. But there really is a host of different technologies with potentially different market segments and niche markets. And in the ever-expanding solar world, what's a niche market may actually turn out to be very large in due course. So we can see in blue the well-established crystalline silicon technologies round about here. Record efficiencies round about 27 or 28%. These are cell efficiencies rather than module efficiencies. So these are the best research cells. So around about 27, 28%. But not the most efficient. The most efficient are these multi-junction technologies. So tandem cells and multi-junction cells, which I'll come back to later. And then down the bottom here, you might see what you might call the cheap and cheerful end of the technology scale, where there are some ultra low cost potential technologies in here. So things like organic photovoltaics that Hamish mentioned, also what I'll talk about, dye-sensitized cells, perovskite cells, etc., where the efficiencies are currently lower, but the potential for ultra low cost manufacturing or other advantages then become apparent. The reason why perovskite solar cells are attracting so much attention at the moment is because they've bridged this gap. So this is the perovskite here in yellow circles, and they have gone from being one of these low-cost printable technologies to having an efficiency comparable with crystalline silicon in under 10 years, which means for the first time ever, we have a technology with a high efficiency, but potentially also ultra low cost printing manufacture. So I'll go on to say something about that. So these are the dye-sensitized solar cell record efficiencies round about here, and the perovskite solar cell efficiencies round about here. For those of you who are unfamiliar, so if you're working, for example, architecture or something of that nature, you might be unfamiliar with the actual inner workings of solar cells. So I just have this very quick schematic to illustrate what's going on, because it does pertain to some of the things I'll say later. You need an absorber layer which absorbs the light and uses that energy to excite an electron. So the technologies are named after this absorber layer. So crystalline silicon, perovskite, cadmium telluride, these are all the names of the absorber layer. You then need a mechanism to ensure that the electrons which are excited and can now move around will move in one direction to the anode, and the holes, which are the positive charges left behind when the negative electrons are removed, that the holes can go in another direction and collect at the cathode. So all solar cells really share this common mechanism, absorbing the light and then using that energy to move electrons in one direction and holes in the other direction. That builds up a potential difference, a photovoltage, and that can then be used to drive a current and do some work in an external circuit, with the electrons going around the external circuit. So that's how all of these things work. So I'm going to start off with a few words on dye-sensitized solar cells. So there are a few companies, there's been a few companies over the years, some of which have come and gone, which have attempted to commercialize dye-sensitized solar cells. So these particular solar cells really mimic the mechanism of photosynthesis, using dye molecules as the light absorbing layer. One of the latest companies to push this forward are Exeger, based in Sweden, and they're really pushing the eco-friendly green credentials of the technology and the links to photosynthesis. And the markets they're aiming at are essentially indoor applications and consumer electronics. So not attempting to achieve mass power generation, but power for your laptop, power for your phone, and indoor power to power the numerous sensors and devices that we're starting to see in smart buildings, which I'll say more about shortly. There are attempts to, or there are applications for dye-sensitized solar cells outdoors, although these are really still at the demonstrator project level. So this science tower in Graz in Austria has the largest installation of dye-sensitized solar cells in the world from 2019. But as I say, it's still a demonstrator type project rather than something that's really commercially standalone on its own. And personally, I would say that this is less likely to be a major technology direction. The more likely direction are the indoor applications and consumer goods applications. So I'm just going to show you a couple of slides from our recent work just to illustrate some of this direction of travel, and the use of particular of dye-sensitized solar cells for indoor use, as I just mentioned, powering the so-called Internet of Things. So we anticipate in the future that our buildings will increasingly have lots of sensors, basically controlling everything that's going on. We use billions of primary batteries per year around the world. It would be much better if those sensors were autonomous. They didn't need to be wired to a power supply. They didn't have to have batteries. They could just harvest, scavenge indoor light to power themselves using indoor solar cells. So why dye-sensitized solar cells? Well, this plot shows basically the performance of the solar cell as a function of wavelength. So this is from some of our recent work, and it shows that the dye-sensitized solar cell is operating over this wavelength range around about 400 up to about 700 nanometers, which essentially matches visible light. So indoor light coming from LEDs or fluorescent lights is only really delivering this light in this range. So the solar cells can be very efficient in this range, in fact, much more efficient than crystalline silicon. So here's a graph showing this dye-sensitized solar cell under one sun, giving about 9.5% efficiency. However, in 1000 lux, which is an indoor lamp, nearly 30% efficiency. So the most efficient technologies for indoor use are dye-sensitized solar cells and perovskite solar cells, and that's where we anticipate a lot of use. Partly because they also don't have to meet such stringent long-term stability conditions in outdoor sunlight. So one of the things holding back dye-sensitized solar cells has always been stability, which I've just mentioned, and part of that is because the best performing cells use liquid electrolyte components as the whole conducting layer. And again, what we've been working on this year we've managed to take a unique new way to solidify that electrolyte. So going from a liquid to solid electrolytes. And again, you can see the performance here as a function of wavelength. The solid shown in red is more or less the same performance as the liquid shown in black. So that's again an important direction of travel in dye-sensitized solar cells, is to try to improve the stability, and going to all solid state systems is really essential for that. And that's one of the things we've been trying to do. So that was a quick highlight of the potential of dye-sensitized solar cells in indoor applications. And the rest of the time, we're going to talk about what's happening in the world of perovskite solar cells, following on from some of the things that Hamish was saying. First of all, what is a perovskite? Well, a perovskite actually is a name for a huge family of materials that share a common crystal structure, a common arrangement of the atoms in the solid structure. And the ones that are relevant to solar cell applications are these lead halide perovskites. So they have lead and iodide as part of the formula. And this diagram again just shows what I showed you before. The absorber layer is the perovskite, and then you have the selective charge transport layers on the anode and the cathode. And this is a side view of those layers in a solar cell made in my lab. So what's the big deal with lead halide perovskite solar cells? Well, as I said before, they have excellent efficiency comparable with crystalline silicon. However, because this material is soluble and it can be dissolved in solution, they can be manufactured by printing processes rather than the high energy, high cost methodologies used for crystalline silicon. So they have the potential to reach ultra low costs. Manufacturability, imminent. I'll say more about that later. Stability has always been a challenge, but is improving. Lead, Hamish mentioned the concern over the use of toxic lead in the absorber layer. Now, there's two schools of thought in this. One is that's a killer problem and will really limit the applicability of these solar cells. And the other school of thought is that's not a problem at all. So there's quite divergent views on this. It has been pointed out that the amount of lead in a lead halide perovskite solar cell is less than you get in a crystalline silicon solar cell in the solder. So actually the quantities of lead is absolutely tiny, because these are thin film absorbers, really nanometers thick in order to form the active layer. So tiny amounts of lead. The disadvantage being, of course, that this is soluble lead, unlike lead used in solder, so it may be more bioavailable. So that's why there's still some debate around the extent to which toxic lead might be a problem. So lots of work has gone into improving stability. The active layer can be sensitive to moisture, to oxygen, to temperature, to light, to oxygen combined with light, and can have intrinsic chemical instabilities at the interfaces. So a lot of challenge. This is an older paper from and other groups' work going back a number of years, just showing the sorts of changes they've made. They've changed the formula here to go from a low stability to a higher stability and humidity. This is just representative of the hundreds and possibly even now thousands of studies that have got into methodologies to improve the stability. So yes, they have stability challenges, but there's been a lot of work put into this, and there are ways of mitigating these that are being enhanced all the time, such that we're now on the cusp of manufacturability. I'll show you one example way of improving that stability, and also introduce this type of screen printed cell. So in this is a side view of the cell, and basically in this particular implementation, all these electrode materials are fully porous. So these porous electrode materials are printed first of all by screen printing, which is a methodology used to print t-shirts, so it's ultra simple and cheap. And then the perovskite absorber material is interpenetrated through all the pores of the material. So because it's contained in these nanopores of these host materials, it's protected and stabilized, and you get much more stable perovskite solar cells by this method. This is one way in which the stability has been improved. These particular designs are on the verge of commercialization. This is my former student, Yuri Hu, who now works in Wuhan, National Lab for Optoelectronics. This is her boss, Hongwei Han. And they use that methodology I showed in the last slide to make these panels. And they have their spin-out company, Wonder Solar, who are manufacturing these panels completely by printing. Every layer is printed. This picture behind shows the fabrication facility. So it's a clean room, but it doesn't have to be ultra clean. And there are no high energy or high temperature, ultra high vacuum or anything like that involved. It's all just screen printing. So they are working on commercialization. Another company that is leading in commercialization is Saulatech. One of my former students also works here, and they are focusing on inkjet printing. So they point out that inkjet printing can be very flexible. You can change the requirements for different customers very quickly. And again, they're focused on things like foils on roofs, because the cells are low weight. They can be semi-transparent, as Hamish was outlining for other technologies. They're talking about smart furniture, consumer electronics again, powering laptops, transportation, lightweight cells in cars, carports, space applications. Here's some of their foil, their chargers, etc. This is some stuff off their website from 2018. Here's some of their foils that they can print. And they, according to their website, they have a production line and they're making these solar carports for the electromobility market. So these are some early products on the market in perovskite solar cells. Again, Hamish mentioned Oxford PV, leading UK company in this space, and they're focused on perovskite silicon tandem cells. And they have a pilot line of tandem cells with silicon, and they're promising products imminently. What's the point of tandem cells? As I showed on that NREL chart, multi-junction cells, including tandems, can reach ultra high efficiency. So conventional silicon panels, 20 to 22% typical efficiency. Perovskite silicon tandems can perhaps exceed 30% efficiency. And relatively simple to make because the perovskite layer is a printable layer. So having manufactured the silicon layer in the conventional manner, the top layer of the perovskite could be simply printed on by a straightforward approach. Again, a slightly technical slide, just for those who are interested. What's the big deal about tandems? Well, a single absorber solar cell, such as crystalline silicon, has a theoretical efficiency limit of about 32%. So when we talk about silicon reaching 27% best cell efficiency, that's not 27 from a possible 100, that's 27 from a possible 32. So actually incredibly well optimized. And that's because with a single absorber, you can only have one band gap, so you can only optimize for one particular wavelength range. Light of lower energy, this is the solar spectrum, light of lower energy is not absorbed at all, and light of higher energy wastes some of that energy as heat because it has too much energy to be optimized for that absorber. So by using a multi-junction with stacked absorbers, you can optimize different absorbers for different parts of the spectrum, and you can exceed this 32% efficiency limit, which is a thermodynamic limit for single junction solar cells. So that's me done. Here's my conclusions. Are these disruptive technologies? Dye-sensitized solar cells have the potential to be that, but specifically for indoor use, not to compete with silicon, not for properties or outdoor or mass power generation. In this particular niche, it could be huge, and they're one of the best technologies for that context. Perovskite solar cells, we are promised products imminently from Oxford PV amongst others, and they are promising that those technologies will be more efficient than silicon because they'll be tandems. And that then can be a step change, disruptive introduction to the market. It may take time, there may be challenges still, but it's on its way. The real question for me is around stability. If the efficiency is over 30%, so much higher than silicon, that's fabulous, but it falls down flat if it only lasts 10 or 15 years. it has to have a comparable lifetime to silicon products. So let's see if they can manage that. We'll find out in the near future. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Neil. Thank you to all our speakers for your interesting presentation. We will now go into question and answer. I would first take questions in the chat box. We have a question from Dr. Richard Hall to Grant. He asked, do you think three-phase should be more standard in the UK? It seems it would benefit solar batteries, electric cars and heat pumps.
Yeah, absolutely I do. I think at the moment we've got the electricity grid obviously was designed at a time when people didn't really imagine the kind of loads that domestic houses have and the kind of relationship they would have with the grid. There was an assumption you'd have a big power station at one end and houses at the other, and so it's quite difficult to change that quickly. But we are seeing more people, especially self-builders, looking at the three-phase option as they're starting to design houses for themselves where they're going to have all these loads. And yeah, I mean, single phase is quite limiting, particularly from the export side of things. So I do. How we go about getting more three-phase, I'm not sure. More intelligent design at the building stage for new builds certainly is an option, and the grid operators in our area are becoming more proactive. Yeah, in short, definitely it's more three-phase at the connection point would be definitely a way forward. Yeah.
I have an extension of that question. How about DC grid to pair with PV system?
DC, I don't have too much of a view in general. I think the practicalities, even significantly more so than three-phase, the practicalities are yeah, on a different scale, I think, just purely because so much is geared around AC. And nowadays the efficiency gains aren't huge. We've played around with having more DC systems within properties to tie in, for example, direct DC powered heat pumps to tie in with the solar PV, but things like inverters now are so relatively low cost and so efficient. The advantage is to then to switch to DC, having not been there already. Personally, I'm not so sure. If we'd gone back and asked the question at the start, knowing that we would have lots of DC generation going on, then maybe building a grid around DC from the start is a different question. But changing to DC from where we are now, I think is, I don't think there's enough advantages to look at it. Interesting question though.
Thank you. We have a question for Hamish. Can you vary the density of color or shading with intensity of irradiation?
In terms of the color, I'm not sure if you're referring to what the module looks like or the wavelength it's absorbing at, but the materials basically dictate the wavelengths that they're going to absorb at. So that we can't adjust. With organics, the advantage of organics is that because we are the ones manipulating the materials, you can then create materials to perform the function that you're looking at. So in that sense, you're getting your browns, you can get your greens, you can get your other colors in terms of that side of it. I don't know if I've actually answered the question there or not.
This question is from Ian. Would you like to, is there anything that you would like to add, Ian? Are you there? We can't hear you.
Does this work?
Yes, sorry, Ian, go ahead.
The glass which changes color with the intensity of solar radiation is quite interesting and very helpful. So I just wondered if your material could do that.
Okay, yeah, the answer is not. I think you're referring to the films that I was showing in one of the new technology areas.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not an expert on that particular technology, so I wouldn't dare actually to comment too much on it. Probably Neil probably knows more than I do on those sorts of new technologies and the films.
Okay.
The luminescence side of the films. But
I think obviously you can get kind of reactor light photochromic films, but I'm not aware of anybody combining them with transparent PV. I presume you could, and then you would have what you're asking about, Ian, but I'm not aware of anybody having done it. It might be a step too far in terms of trying to make a saleable technology and deliverable in a you know, a reasonably market-orientated way at present.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question on BIPV from Angus. Angus, would you like to ask your question? Are you there, Angus? If not, we will go to next question. This is from Grant to perhaps Hamish. Which trades are involved in the installation of the products? Do you find issues identifying the required installation skills and resources?
Yes, so we as a company don't install. So we're reliant on the solar installation industry, like Grant's company, which we do use. In terms of in sort of general construction sites, say if you're putting up an office building, there you have exactly the same trades as you normally would. The issue is scheduling them, and so the primary contractor is very, very wary about putting in BIPV because they don't really understand the process involved and they haven't had the experience of that process. And the risk ultimately lies with the primary contractor rather than everybody else in that supply chain. So historically, there's been a major resistance to installing BIPV in buildings because of that lack of overall knowledge and understanding of the processes within the construction sector, much more than actually the understanding of the solar modules themselves.
Are you okay with the answer?
Yeah, great, thank you. Yeah, very similar to any kind of innovation or something slightly different with any similar product, but yeah, perfect, thank you.
Okay, we have a question for you from Chris. Could you talk about roof orientation and pitch and how it affects efficiency?
Yeah, so within the UK, certainly pitch is an easy one. Anywhere within, let's say, between sort of 25 and 50 degrees, 55 degrees roof pitch is will give you something within 90% of the optimum total generation, I would say, which fortunately most buildings, especially domestic buildings, are within that range. You'll of course get other roof types and which can be, you can add frames or various things to get to the right angle. The orientation is more interesting. Again, anywhere within so say 15 degrees of south, typically you're going to be within 90% of the absolute maximum of the total, the maximum yield. But then anywhere on the southern plane between east and west, you're going to have a useful output. And what I would say in that front is it can be useful to have panels in different orientations, for example, half east and half west, because although you'll get a lower maximum total yield, you'll spread that yield out over the day, so you'll get more earlier in the day and you'll get more later in the day, but you'll just have a reduced peak in the middle of the day. So particularly where you don't have storage, that can result in a better match between the load on the site and what you're generating and when, so you can end up having a higher self-usage, which can be valuable. To ensure, I wouldn't rule out anything within the southern plane, and particularly with the more advanced the performance optimization and multi-power point tracking technologies and things that are out there, you can get a lot. Within Scotland, the pitch does really, the further north you go, the higher the pitch requires to be for the maximum, but again, it's not significantly far away from your usual roof pitch. And I think probably so from other products that I'm really talking about is traditional kind of, I would say traditional standard PV modules here, but there's other products around. like the polysilicon solar, where they're not quite so dependent on orientation and pitch, and there may be different factors that might be interesting actually to hear about on that front, which I would be interested in. Hope that answers the
Thank
question.
you very much. Okay, we have a question from Neil Barnes. Neil, do you want to ask your question? He asked about, does anybody know about power roll?
Yes. Hi there. I was very much enjoying those presentations. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, some wonderful stuff. I work for Wormworks Scotland by day, and by night and weekend and free time, I'm a volunteer for the Linlithgow Community Development Trust. We've done some work with AS Solar over the last few years, setting up a social enterprise on solar energy called Linlithgow Solar. And we're engaging with young people and graduates and undergraduates to take forward a new company around energy enterprises. So I'm very excited about all these possibilities and want to follow up with the speakers. But recently we were introduced through a big investment company to this power roll product. Now, I don't know, because I'm not a technology expert, I must confess. Is that the same as the solar film that Hamish was talking about? Does anybody know about this company? They seem to have come from the old EGA, if you remember, the Energy Action Grants Agency that was around for a number of years. And I used to work with them when I was working in England as an energy officer for Session Borough Council. Seems to be those folks from that particular organisation that have set this up with someone in Sunderland. Does anybody know and you know anything about the performance of it? And
I've met guys from Power Roll,
right.
North England. So yeah, Sunderland sounds about right. My understanding is it's still quite developmental.
Yes.
So they have efficiencies around about 10 or 11%, I think.
Okay.
I'm not entirely sure what their proposed market is. So with that efficiency, clearly it's not trying to compete with crystalline silicon for installation in buildings, etc. So it's presumably trying to compete more in the market against organic photovoltaics and perovskites and such like in the printable, flexible, lower cost type market. So I think that's sort of where they've positioned themselves, but I'm not aware that they have products on sale. I think they're still quite developmental at the moment.
Yeah, from what I remember about the output ratios, although they gave it in weight rather than area, it looked pretty decent. I think from memory it was about half what it would be for a traditional crystalline silicon panel, and they are claiming that it is much cheaper to manufacture. And it could be applied onto anything. So it looked really exciting. And obviously the guys behind it, you know, I have a lot of faith in them that they wouldn't be out to kind of dupe the public. You know, this is a very serious product, and also that there's, you know, serious money potentially going into it. So be nice to know a bit more and get more academic, impartial information on that, you know.
Okay, as I say, I think it's I think you're right. They've probably got a lot of money behind them because they're still working hard and developing things. Whether it's reached maturity or not yet, I don't know, because these things change very quickly. If it has reached maturity and they have products, it's probably only just happening now.
Okay. Thanks very much, Neil.
Thank you very much. Now we will like to take the last question. If you could answer very quickly, Grant. Are solar tracking systems worth the investment for ground mount solar setups? Any drawbacks?
So we have some experience with solar tracking systems. We did do one in particular where the system was installed on a fixed ground mount frame originally, and we were asked to go and install a tracking system at one of the single arm units where you have a single mount in the middle and the panels are mounted on a single array that tracks on 2 axis. So that did give us an interesting comparison. I believe the the performance benefits were significant. I think they were in, I can't remember exactly, but I feel like they were within the range of sort of 10 to 15% improvement, at least. They're quite significant. But I do know that the cost at the time was also significant compared to standard ground mount. So I think for small scale, where I would say below sort of 50 kilowatts probably, I don't think you'd get an economic return in a short period of time, is the answer. But I think certainly larger scale systems, and that's where you do see them more, where you have fields of these things, and particularly where the components can be obtained very, very cheaply, they can be worthwhile. I do also know that you've got a quite a hard cost return balance in terms of the reliability, because you are introducing mechanical components to the system. One of the beauties with most solar electric technologies is that they're static, they're electric, and there's few moving parts. So as soon as you introduce something like that, you are introducing an element of mechanical risk and maintenance requirements as well. And yeah, the more reliable you want it, and you need to spend more. So in general, massive gain, but massive extra cost as well. So not usually an economic thing to do for a small system.
Do we have further question, Andrew?
No, that was perfect. I've just seen a few people using Helio Motion style setups and on fairly small systems, and sort of my initial thoughts were that it would be fairly expensive, potential maintenance issues, but I wasn't really sure on the efficiency gain. I'd heard someone talking in the region of about 20–25% at one point, but I've never seen any information or experience to back that up.
Yeah, certainly in that ballpark. You can actually model it pretty well. The software we use just nowadays can bring these things into play, and yeah, those kind of figures are probably realistic. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Sorry, I promised this is the last question, but this is really the last question. Nick has raised his hand. Would you like to ask your question?
Hello. I was actually just referring you to some of the other questions which you missed out. The one from, for example, from Alex, a little about the question, particularly to Grant, but to others, I guess, about the CO2 payback for photovoltaics generally, particularly in Scotland, where the CO2 loading of power is perhaps quite a lot less than other places, which would suggest that PVs are maybe not that environmentally good. And so there's another question there about the polycarbonates or something in the films. Is that the sort of thing that we would be that we want to encourage? So I'm really asking for answers to some of the other questions that you've missed out.
I don't mind if the CO2 one was directed at me, I think, so I don't mind trying to answer it quickly, because it is a very good question. Sorry, I was just distracted by something there. It was, it's true to say that the carbon intensity of the grid has reduced significantly, and there is a point to say, I guess at this stage, rather than offsetting the embedded carbon of the production, I guess it's a case of looking at the alternative. And if you stop installing things like wind and solar, I guess there'll come a point where the carbon intensity of the grid will then begin to increase again. So then do you wait until it goes up and then start installing more? So there's probably a balance. The other thing I would say is there's paper shared, I think it was Neil that actually shared it with me recently, that had quite a good figure about the amount of recyclability in modules, and it was something in the order of 95%. This figure came from the PV Cycle, the European organisation that is in place to obtain and recycle modules. So they aren't they're by no means throwaway products, and I think that has to be considered in the embedded carbon sort of calculation as well. And at the same time, there are work that, again, people like Neil and myself and many others are looking at how to increase the value of the recycling element. So yeah, absolutely, the CO, the carbon intensity is reduced, and in a sense, wind and solar have potentially been a victim of their own success, if you look at it in those plain and simple terms. But yeah, they're not a throwaway product, and that'll only increase because there will be, I think, the number of panels being removed or coming to the end of life is expected to increase something like tenfold over the next decade, and that's just going to go up and up. So yeah, those figures will valid point, but the figures will improve. And there's also the question of, yeah, what else would you do to balance those equations? Because if you stop installing things like solar and wind, then the carbon intensity will just go back up again.
Yeah.
Happy if anyone else wants to contribute from the speakers as well there.
No, I mean, I would agree with you. And in terms of the question about some of the nastier materials within solar panels, yes, there are some nasty materials in all types of solar panels. Cadmium telluride isn't particularly pleasant. Lead isn't particularly pleasant, and quite frankly, quite a lot of the nasty metals in the fabrication of crystalline silicon cells is also pretty unpleasant. The difference is that in virtually all cases, they're encapsulated. They're not actually free. They sit around for 30 odd years before they are disposed of. At the moment, there is very limited recycling capacity in solar panels in Europe. However, that's because nobody's recycling them yet. So it's perfectly understandable. And ultimately, much like laminate glass is a difficult thing to recycle because you've got a plastic layer between the two pieces of glass. You can do that now, and it's really just a matter of the technologies keeping up with the pace of what's going on to be able to address those issues.
Thank you. Actually, embedded carbon LCA is in our upcoming seminars in our pipeline. So if you like, please come back and join us for our next seminar. With this, I would like to thank all the speakers and participants again for your participation, and hope to see you in our next seminar. Thank you and bye-bye.